שלום וברוכים הבאים לפסטיבל דוק אביב ה-22 ולתחרות הבינלאומית. אנחנו שמחים לארח בפסטיבל את בו אדקינס, במאי סרט ימי הקניבליזם. אנחנו ננהל עכשיו שיחה באורך של חצי שעה. אנחנו ממש מזמינים אתכם להצטרף ולשאול שאלות, אתם יכולים לשאול אותם גם בעברית, ואני אתרגם. תשתמשו בבקשה בפונקציית ה-Q&A, שנמצאת למטה באמצע ימין המסך. בבקשה, תימנעו מלהשתמש בפונקציית הצ'אט, ועכשיו באנגלית. Hello and welcome to the 22nd Doc Aviv Film Festival and to the international competition. We're very honored and happy to have here with us today Bo Edkins, the filmmakers of Days of Cannibalism, sorry. We're going to have a conversation for the next 30 minutes. If you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A section. You'll see the icon at the center right of the screen. Please avoid using the chat function. So hi to Boho, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I didn't have a chance to ask you before the conversation, but where are you at the moment?
I'm in Berlin currently.
Oh, yes. With the festival in the days of Corona means that, we speak to people that are all over the place, and it just shows us how, filmmaking is such a global occupation in a way. So, people document one space and then leave in the other, or travel to another.
Exactly. And find the financing for the film in 5 other different spaces. And yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I have to ask, what brought you to Lesotho then?
Well, I grew up in Lesotho, in fact.
Oh.
Yeah. So Lesotho is it's like coming home for me. Mm-hmm. And I've been making a number of films there over the years. So it seemed only natural that I'd make the film about Africa and China in Lesotho.
Yes, and so you had like very intimate access in a way to your subjects, at least the local ones. But I'm very curious because I'm very curious about the way you documented or interacted with the locals and with the, I guess we can call them guests, so the Chinese entrepreneurs that find their way to Lesotho. I'm very curious to hear more about how you position yourself within the situation.
Well, I made the film over many years, as it often is with documentaries.
Yes.
So I had time to build up my relationship with, especially with the Chinese guests, as you call them, because that it took some time to be invited into their space. And for them to trust me and whereas with the Basotho, because I speak the language and I've been living there for so many years, I kind of always knew someone who was related to someone who knew somebody who knew someone. So I was very quickly deep into the society. Yeah.
I mean, I want to dig in a little bit more into the kind of like autobiographical aspect of it, because I mean, Lesotho, I mean, if I can make like a general observation, like many other African territories, is so fractured. Also, like its history is fractured by various influences of people that came to these territories due to mostly financial interest, like the Chinese that we see in the film. So I wanted to ask you, where do you situate yourself in relation to this very long history, or where do you situate Lesotho also in connection to this very long history of financial extraction, of people, going to these territories, to make profit, but then also sometimes find a home there or don't find a home there. Sometimes they're guests, sometimes they become part of the local texture.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a heavy question.
Big questions. Well, what is very interesting to me about Lesotho is that I define Lesotho in relation to South Africa a lot.
Yeah.
Because it is surrounded by South Africa, but a completely independent country. Yeah. And if you compare it to South Africa, or making films in South Africa today, one is confronted by the trauma and violence that is left by apartheid, Because apartheid was extremely effective in breaking down the structures of the communities and the divide and rule of the Afrikaners or the occupying forces broke down all indigenous structures. Whereas Lesotho, in contrast, has always been very whole.
Yes.
You know, it really, like, it is there's a kind of a dignity and a pride in being a Lesotho and in living in this country that's very poor, but it's sort of a wholeness that I found fascinating.
Yeah.
And Lesotho, especially in the 1980s, there was a lot of financial, like, I think most embassies in the world had an embassy in Lesotho, you know, strangely enough, because they wanted to be close to South Africa, but obviously could not because of apartheid. So Lesotho had kind of a very strategic positioning within South Africa. And that is why I grew up there, because my parents were working in the development aid, and my father was a political exile from South Africa, who was not allowed to go back to his country, and that is why I grew up in Lesotho. So Lesotho has always been this island of resistance and kind of of otherness within this traumatic landscape of South Africa.
Yeah. And
Lesotho, being extremely poor, always sent its migrants to the South African gold mines to go earn. I mean, it was always a country where people left to go earn money somewhere else, because in the mountains there really isn't much. And so what's really interesting now is this reversal, where you have new entrepreneurs coming from so far away to these mountain spaces looking to make a living, you know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of partly why I began making this film, because within this town, Tabatseka, there is this deep cultural understanding, or that the structured community is still very whole, and there's this kind of mythology around the cow, you know, the animal, the cow, right?
Yeah.
Because basically a cow is the way there are no banks, so you invest your money in animals, and it's kind of like a retirement fund for the future. Or if you're a rich person, you invest your money in cattle, and it's like a communal wealth from which the whole community can profit in some way. You know, you don't just buy a house and live in it. You have a big herd, and you employ other people to take care of your cows, and like everyone drinks the milk, and you know, it's a communal wealth. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you also negotiate bridal prices with cows. You know, you sort of say, look, I would like to marry your daughter. You know, I offer you 10 cows, and they say, they give me 8 cows. I'll give you 2 calves later, and it kind of creates. It's a glue between communities. Yeah. And there are all sorts of stories about the cattle being, as my radio presenter in the film calls it, gods with white noses. You know. So you have this structure. You have this structure in Lesotho, or this society which is whole, and where the cow is the basis, the economic coin of this place. And now it's all changing because of the Chinese.
Yeah.
The Chinese come with their shops and their global capitalism. You know, they are also just a product of capitalism. They are not they are not the. I mean, they are capitalists, of course, but it's not their fault. They're just also forced out of their places because of capitalism. And as you see in my film, they end up investing in cows. Yeah. Right? And when they start investing in cows, the cow loses its metaphorical and symbolic value and becomes just a piece of meat. And that's kind of one arc in the story, which in the film, which I'm trying to develop. Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting to me, because what happened once the Chinese started investing in cows, basically the cow entered capitalism, and it entered capitalism as value rather than this something else that it serves for the local community. And this kind of changed the rules of the game. For me, it's so interesting because, I mean, what the film made me reflect on is how, we tend to think about colonialism as this system that is built around, two entities, right? Mm-hmm. The colonizer and the colonized, but actually, no, it's much more fragmented. And also historically, it's much more fragmented because, I mean, I'm so curious about, this comparison that you made with South Africa and how, there is this tradition of migration labor that then happen in reverse. And to add to it another layer, I want to ask you about the opening scene of the film, which really left, I was left with it's like jaw dropping. First of all, I was so confused. I was like, where are we?
And why?
And why? And what are those people doing? So if you can tell us a little bit more about, first of all, what do we see in the opening scene? And also, why do you decided to open the film with this scene?
Well, what you see in the opening scene is the reason why I actually began the story. That's because I was staying I was living in Hong Kong for a while, and I went to Guangzhou, and I think it was my father who told me about, he'd read about it in some newspaper about these African business people going to China to Guangzhou and looking for opportunities. So I went and I stayed in the hotel, because they stay in these little hotels, and I lived in a hotel there with them for a few weeks, and just to try to understand what's going on, and that really gave me. And I was very fascinated, about them creating this little African space within the hotel, because in the hotel suddenly you had Chinese people cooking African food, African cloths were everywhere, and like the way the spaces change. And so I wanted to make a film about spaces, and that's why it was a film about the hotel space and this town space. So it's not a film about people as such. It's a film about spaces, and within this town in Lesotho, how the Chinese have created their own little space.
The grocery store, for instance.
The grocery store and their living room with their karaoke and inaccessible spaces as well. Like how, but also this creating these spaces also creates solitude. It's a film about this hotel is a very sad place. Everyone's there by themselves. They don't know each other. It's a very solitary existence. As hotels often are, it's quite melancholic, and the same melancholy is I found within the Chinese traders in Lesotho. So that's why I started the film with that, because that was basically the reason I made the film was my visit to China, because over the years I'd seen the Chinese come to Lesotho or come to Africa, and it kind of was in the back of my mind a lot. And when I was in China and I was there with the African traders, I realized that this is how I could begin the story. This is how I could, by creating this parallel. And I put it at the beginning of the film. I mean, one could also have the scene at the end of the film. One could have gone to China afterwards. But I think by putting it right at the beginning of the film, I sort of set the tone that this is a global issue. This is not just a film about a small country that has an influx of foreigners. It's a film about a small country that has an influx of foreigners in a global setting. That this is happening somewhere else in a different way, and it's confusing, and it hits you in the face, and you don't know why, but for me it draws me into it, and then I just love it when you kind of cut from this neon chaos to this absolute calm, barren landscape.
The cut itself, I think, is very cinematic, but also it kind of like makes it visible how complete or sealed are these spaces that I would call even extra territories, because I referred earlier to my confusion seeing the opening scene. I was like, are we in Africa? Are we in China? I mean, where are we? And the same goes with like some of the scenes that has to do with the spaces of the Chinese workers or the Chinese entrepreneur within Lesotho, right? I mean, it's like we're in the China that is within Africa. So it's how like, I think that, you talked about community becoming, moving from being coherent to non-coherent. I think the space itself become very fragmented. And I mean, for me, another thing that was really interesting, is the cut of the visual language that completely changed. And there is another cut that shows cut in the visual language or the continuity that happens later in the film it's when the robbery in the grocery store takes place. And I wanted to also ask you about this decision. All of a sudden, we experience everything from the CCTV, which is a very different kind of engagement, very different kind of vision. I mean, first of all, I left really speechless after this scene. If you can say a little bit more about what happened there, because I think you leave us with a lot of uncertainty, which I'm sure is you meant it in purpose, but also why did you decide to depict the violence through the CCTV?
I'm just going to turn on my light because I feel like it's a little bit, is this better?
Yeah.
Or, yeah? Yeah.
It's part of the charm of the online festival that,
that you can hear the sounds of my daughter in the background. her happy gurgles.
I mean, we produce this like also fragmented territories.
Exactly.
Talking to the audience in Israel. You're in Berlin talking about Lesotho.
Yeah. All right. So the CCTV scene, it's well, we were filming with the Chinese community, and it was quite tough because not much happens, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, they took us into their lives, but their lives don't involve much more than work and being home in the evenings, you know?
Yeah.
And home in the evenings often means just drinking a lot because everyone's a bit frustrated and bored, you know? And they didn't, you know, and nothing was really happening. Like there's no scenes, you know, there's no big drama, you know? And we kind of we're filming the same thing every day, and it was on I think it was 4:30 in the afternoon, and the World Cup final of 2018, football World Cup final, was at 5 o'clock. You know, and we came there, and that was the day before we're leaving, and I kind of thought, okay, you know, maybe we'll film a nice scene of them watching football together, or something will happen, you know, and we're kind of hanging around there waiting for the football game to begin. And in that moment, the shop gets robbed, and we're part of it. And in fact, I am the person who lies on the floor in the front of the camera, and who takes a child in his arms. There's that one moment when they come in and they put us down, and so that's me. So the three of us, you know, the crew was part of it, and we all got locked up together, and we all went to hospital together afterwards. That was quite an important bonding experience, you know. But we didn't film anything, you know. And then I asked them if I could use the material from the CCTV camera, and they said yes. And there I had my scene, you know. And basically, it's a sort of subliminal violence that is building up throughout the film the whole time. And you're kind of wondering, when is it going to erupt, you know, because there are these moments of tension, kind of like aggression, just sort of bubbling under the surface, and it has to happen. And I mean, it was terrifying being part of the robbery, but it was really important, you know, and it was really important that I, as a filmmaker, am part of that process. So that's why I decided to kind of let the frame jump out and show basically it's like show the kind of it's almost like a behind the scene, you know, the process of the filmmaking. And
you know, I mean, it's interesting. Someone just told me about CCTV that it's the most banal form of documentation because it's always document. There is nothing happened. That's the premise, right?
And there's no POV, right? There's no point of view. It's kind of as wide as possible. Yeah.
And it's very interesting that we sense the violence building up, but it's very implicit. And then when we finally get this eruption, it happened via a CCTV. So this is actually a moment where in a way, we don't take sides because we don't have a point of view. And I think also this is why, for me, for instance, that was a very powerful moment.
Also, what's interesting about it is that it looks like it could be fiction, right? I mean, like, it is so strange or perfectly created by having this little girl in pink, in the very center of the scene on her little trolley. And it's like the mise en scène of the scene is quite perfect, right? And throughout the film, there are moments that are fiction, there are moments that are documentary, and I kind of move between the two. And you wonder about that when you see this, And I think that's, and I mean, it's pure documentary, and CCTV is supposed to be like the truth, but you kind of, but it does, because then you have the radio scene, and they speak about an attack, right?
Yeah.
In fact, they're talking about an attack that happened to another shop, but we mix it in as if they're talking about this attack, and that's where, and this is what I always love when documentary and fiction start mixing,
Yeah.
And it's really, you know, and it doesn't really matter whether what's fiction, what's documentary, but like that the scene has a certain truth and resonance within it.
But I mean, can you talk a little bit about the scenes that are staged? Sure. I mean, I think that there are different levels of staging. I mean, because one can also think about the radio show as a stage scene, right? Because in a way, you know, once you have a moderator, they're like a director, right? They kind of like, you know, set the tone. And but if you can talk a little bit about actually your working.
Well, it's like not I like to say it's more like a directed reality, you know, because it's all real, you know, it's not fake. And like the radio presenter is, I asked him to talk about certain things, you know, on his show. And the show is live and it's real, and he's talking from, you know, he's speaking the truth, you know, but he's talking about things I asked him to speak about. So, I mean, you could call that directed. And the big scene is the courtroom scene.
Yes.
Which is obviously a key scene, right?
Yeah.
And we weren't allowed to film a real courtroom session because, I mean, I went to the ministry and I spoke to the Minister of Justice and like, you know, and I went through all the due processes, and they said that, you know, they'd love to help me, but if I filmed a scene for real with my cameras, there might be complaints that I had influenced the judge in a certain way, you know, and that, you know, they'll take issue to that with that. So I reenacted it in the sense that I asked the magistrate to go through the processes. I got a real prosecutor. I got 2 cattle thieves, you know, who just gotten out of jail, and so I got everyone in the scene is themselves.
Yeah.
But in a vacuum space, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the crime they speak about is also something I kind of asked them. You know, to kind of I workshopped the idea a little bit with them. That the 1 year sentence per cow stolen is the rule of thumb. That's what you get for stock theft. I mean, the magistrate did what he usually does.
I mean, just a comment about this. I find it really interesting that the moment where, you know, you more interfere in the situation are the radio and the courtroom, because in a way, these are 2 instances of even without your intervention, you know, this is 2 instances in which the social order is on stage, right? I mean, radio is this kind of like public sphere where we can reflect on some of, you know, the kind of like social affairs, and also the court is a place where we need to kind of like manifest in a very distinct scene. We need to manifest what are the values that put us together as a society. And for me, it's really interesting that these are the moments where you intervene in the film, which brings me to another question. We talked about like 2 spaces, or more than 2 spaces, but multiple spaces, and we talked about 2 value systems, you know, the cow and the massively produced goods, or, you know, global capitalism in general. But there are also 2 systems of law that are happening in the film, and you know, actually I think that the crime scene with the CCTV and the courtroom are like the 2 ends of these 2 systems of law. And if you can say a little bit about that, or how you build it in the film or throughout the film.
So what is interesting to me is this idea of frontier space. That the film, and this is why I kind of like call it a Western, because it happens in a space that is a frontier, in a sense that
I wanted to ask you about that. It's totally a Western.
It's a frontier. You know, it's exactly that's what Western's art. You know, it's a frontier space. It's where the rule of law, an old rule of law, has been usurped by the newcomers. You know, and things are still out of balance. No, there's a kind of like unbalance, and what happens is that the stronger or more powerful agent will usurp the other, but it's like it's a mess. You know, it's a mess, and the new rules haven't yet been established, and that's what's happening there right now. Like the old gods, you know, the cows are dying. The new orders come, money. and everything's a little bit out of control, but in very, very subtle ways, you know. I mean, it's not civil war or anything like that, but one can see that in this subliminal violence, you know, in the scene where the uncle speaks to his nephew about stealing horses, and one didn't used to do this in our time. What happened? What's going on? You know, the kind of the confusion of the older people, you know, and that's why the film is a Western, and it's because of this frontier, you know?
Yeah. It's funny because I was thinking, okay, how to approach this question, to talk about the two laws or actually to ask about Western. But to further complicate it, I mean, I want to read you a question that we got from the audience. So someone is asking, are the Chinese encouraged or welcomed by the government of Lesotho to come? And is it thought that they would better the economy in the country? Are the citizens happy about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the big question, right? And yes, so, all right. So it's, I have this little story where I was speaking to this one employee, but from the Chinese, you know, who had just quit her job, you know, and we'd been filming with her, so we knew her a little bit, and she just quit her job with the Chinese, you know. And she's like, you know, I'm so sick of the Chinese. Like, I've been working here for 5 years, you know, it's complete exploitation, you know, I get paid so little, you know. And immediately all my prejudices were like, you know, these damn Chinese, they just come here to make money. It's some sort of neo-colonial wave, you know, they exploit the locals, they send all the money back home, you know, like it all, like immediately, you know, all these prejudices come up. And then she said, and then she showed us another shop, which had been opened by Musutu, entrepreneur, and I said, okay, so why don't you go get a job there? You know, like now you've got experience with the Chinese, maybe you'll get, you know, maybe they'll welcome you at the Lesotho shop, you know. And then she said, you know, if I go work at the Lesotho shop, you know, I won't get paid at all, you know.
Yeah.
And then I was like, you know, you just can't win, right? You kind of, you know. And then she's like, you know, the Chinese paid me badly, but at least they paid me, you know. Yeah. The Lesotho shop maybe will speak the same language and they'll treat me with respect, but I won't get paid at all, you know. And I think that's kind of the schizophrenia of it's not that easy, you know. It's not like they come and it's not like they're economic invaders. I mean, they create opportunities, they bring jobs, you know, they make money. Some of the money is spread, a lot of the money is sent back home, but they bring a dynamic into the area, which is not necessarily a good thing, but like it is a dynamic, you know, and it is something, you know. This woman would not have a job had the Chinese not been there. So it depends who you're speaking to. The government says, you know, it's great, you know, at least somebody wants to come and make money here, you know. We'll gladly welcome some entrepreneurs, you know. Other people say, oh no, you know, the Chinese just come and make money and disrespect the locals, you know. So there's no simple answer to that, you know. I think most of the people say that the Chinese are very welcome if they stick to local law.
Yeah.
You know, if they respect the local laws, you know, then they're very welcome here. And like, if they tax the money properly, and you know, if they kind of assimilate, then there's hope. You know, it will work.
I mean, I wonder about this assimilation. Is it just like a figure of speech, or no, I think it's a kind of like an easy way out of it, because obviously assimilation is, you know, or a complete assimilation is not, you know, a person, or especially if you have such a movement of people into a place, they change it as much as they're willing to be changed by it. We need to close. I do have, I don't know, maybe we can leave it as an open question, but I mean, the title of the film really got me. And I kept thinking about what is the cannibalism you refer to. I think you kind of answered for it, and was this last answer, because, you know, it's this kind of like system that is self-devouring in a way. It eats itself because it gets so...
Yeah, I mean, the title is heavy. I mean, it's a title that is a little bit loaded. You know, you kind of immediately think, okay, you know, somebody's cannibalizing the other. But I think I tried to show in the film that the cannibalism is more subtle, and this idea of a cattle theft. You know, if a cow is an extension of your personhood, as it is traditionally, and if you steal somebody else's cows, you're devouring the other person. You know, so the title actually came because it was the name of a bar. You know. that we went to, and it was there before the film. And we tried to get rid of it the whole time because we thought, this is too much, but actually it just remained there. But maybe just to close, there's this final thing about assimilation. And I spoke to a Chinese filmmaker in Lesotho, and he said, look, I spoke to him about the violence and what is happening, and will there, why is assimilation so difficult? And he said that he thinks that in the past, China only knew about Africa through the West.
Yeah.
And Africa only knew about China through the West. So it was always through the colonial gaze of the West.
Yeah.
And then within the last, I don't know, it's a very fresh, maybe 10, 15, I don't know, years, these two cultures, if you want to call it, are meeting each other face to face. But within a capitalist structure, so it's a completely utilitarian encounter.
Yeah.
So assimilation is not even a question anymore. It's just about surviving off the other.
Yeah.
Right? Same as the Africans in China, they're just surviving off the other. So, and it's ugly because it's mercantile, but it's in a way it's honest, it's not.
Yeah.
And that's how he explained it to me, and I thought that was quite good. Yeah.
Wow, that's a very powerful statement to end with. Thibaut, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you for spending the time with us from your home in Berlin. Hopefully, for the next film, we will be able to meet in person.
I really hope so. Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you for showing my film. I'm honored. Thank you very much.
Thanks for making the film.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.